Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for everyone for joining us today. I'm Tara Norris, and I'm the president of the Nebraska Chamber Foundation. And we're really happy to have so many of you interested in this webinar today and join us as we launch our latest published study on Nebraska's energy infrastructure. We're going to get started shortly, but first I want to explain the Nebraska Chamber Foundation's role. As all Nebraskans look forward over the next decade, how do we position ourselves to be competitive and ready to make bold moves and big steps that will be needed to provide solutions on so many challenges that are currently facing us? We want to position our state as a leader and a competitor, and certainly not lagging behind our neighbors. So with this goal in mind, the foundation is playing two key roles. First, we're investing in data and research so that we're equipped with the tools to provide the right solutions that are needed. And second, how do we ensure the right people have the data in hand and use it? We're hosting a Go Big Future series all this year that's doing just that. It's getting policymakers and business CEOs, community leaders, and others in the room, equipping them with the data and letting them hear from experts, and then providing the opportunity for alignment on several solutions and as we work together to make those a reality. We couldn't do any of this without our foundation investors, and I want to give them a big shout out right now. Thank you. You can see who they are as well as view all of our published studies on our website, and I'm going to post that link in a minute to the chat. So now we're ready to move to hearing the highlights from our latest study. This Aurora Energy Research Report marks the first phase of the Foundation's 2026 research project. The University of Nebraska has already begun discussions with our broader investor network and to build upon the technical and timely information compiled by Aurora. And they'll be in a second and a third part after this initial part is going to be released now. So what's the goal of this study? Well, we have tremendous resource advantages in Nebraska. 2026 will help us better understand how we're currently managing those resources, how they interact, and importantly, where resource-intensive economic development projects will have the greatest impact. This will inform a more ambitious site development strategy for Nebraska. And it's timely, given the conversations we've been hearing during our Go Big Future events thus far. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Aurora Energy Research, who has put this whole report together, and they've talked to lots of Nebraska investors, foundation investors throughout the last several months. As we go through this, feel free to go to the More button at the bottom of your screen and type in any questions that you have during the moment. They'll either get to it right away or they'll wait till the end, and we'll definitely have a Q&A opportunity at the end. So with that, Gaurav and Payton, you've got the floor.
Thank you so much, Tara. And it's a pleasure for us to be here and to share some of our insights analysis with you all today. Just to introduce ourselves, I'm Gaurav Sen. I manage the SPP coverage team here at Aurora Energy Research. We're the leading power market focused analytics and forecasting company here in the US. And we're really excited to go through our analysis today. I'll let Peyton quickly introduce himself as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Peyton Williams, Senior Associate here at Aurora Energy Research. I work on the advisory team focusing on SPP. Very excited to present what we've been working on to everyone today.
All right. Just to give a quick preview of what we're going to cover today, going to the next slide. We're going to start by looking at the demand context. So against the backdrop of everything that we're going to discuss today, demand is a big part of the story. So we're going to look at the US-wide context, what's going on nationally in terms of energy demand, and what that means for Nebraska. Then we're going to look at the need for new power generation to help meet that demand. So, how do we balance supply with demand over the coming years? And then we're going to look at two aspects of the infrastructure supporting that new generation. So transmission infrastructure to help move electrons from one part of the grid to another, and then gas and electric infrastructure and interconnection, in particular, the natural gas supply that undergirds the natural gas-fired power plants, as well as the gas that powers and heats homes and businesses throughout Nebraska. Finally, we'll close by looking at Nebraska power market policy. In particular, after a number of conversations with stakeholders throughout the last several months, we've taken away a number of insights from those conversations and want to share those with you. And as mentioned earlier, we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. Looking at the demand context, this is a nationwide story, and Nebraska is part of that story, but it helps to understand the national context in which everything is happening. And right now, economic growth more than ever before hinges upon the availability of electricity to help support that economic development. So it used to be that economic development would follow a number of different factors, and electricity availability was not necessarily at the forefront of that conversation. In recent years, what we've seen is as electricity demand has skyrocketed across the country, electricity availability, reliability, affordability is at the center of the conversation of where new investment is going. One of the headlines here, I think, says it pretty well. It's the next industrial geography is wherever the power is cheap, and that economic growth depends on electricity, not oil. So that kind of sets the scene a little bit. If we look at the next slide, we'll see that for many years, electricity demand was relatively stable at the national level. So we had a couple decades of growth. If we go back to 1990 to 2010, electricity demand was growing, roughly in correlation with economic growth. But from 2010 to about 2025, for about 15 years, electricity demand remained relatively flat, even as the economy grew by leaps and bounds. And a lot of that was to do with efficiency in electricity usage, where economic growth was, not necessarily tied to electricity demand growth. That's changed quite a bit in the past year or two, and will continue to be in a new phase over the next decade where electricity demand is growing considerably. Data centers are part of that story. That's the orange part of the bar that you see here. But it's also baseload demand. So it's all the demand that's from industrial activity, from residential, from commercial. There's demand growth across the spectrum. And that means, across the US, we're in a new era in terms of how we think about meeting that demand. If we take a look at the Nebraska specific context on the next slide, we'll see that most of the demand in Nebraska is met by three major public power utilities: Omaha Public Power District, Nebraska Public Power District, and Lincoln Electric. These three utilities are called load responsible entities by SPP. They're the ones who are tasked with generating and contracting electricity to help meet the demand in Nebraska. They then sell on that wholesale electricity to other municipal power districts, co-ops, or directly to retail customers or commercial customers. So these are really some of the key entities that help meet the supply and the demand, help meet the demand with supply in Nebraska. If we go to the next slide, we'll see that the story that's been playing out nationally has also been playing out right here in Nebraska. We had relatively flat peak load. That's kind of the peak level of demand that each of these major utilities see up until the late 2010s. And then if we look at the last 4 or 5 years, that peak load has been increasing. That's more pronounced for NPPD and OPPD, but it is a change across the board, and that drives some of the system-wide planning. So the peak demand is what drives a lot of the planning here, where on average, the grid is not necessarily fully utilized, capacity is not fully utilized, but at those peak moments, that's when things get more utilized, and that's what, as planners, each of these utilities and the grid operator, SPP, that's what they're thinking about. How do we meet that peak demand? If we go to the next slide, we can see that the Nebraska Power Association, which is a industry group consisting of all the major utilities in Nebraska, uh, predicts that peak load is going to increase quite significantly over the next couple decades. And this, it's just one measure. There's a number of different factors that go into this. But the big takeaway here is that we don't expect this trend to change at any point soon. Demand is going to continue to grow. It's going to grow quite significantly over the next decade, next couple decades. And so that's really what the utilities are trying to think about and trying to plan for, and what we as a set of stakeholders in the state need to think about. How do we plan for that electricity demand growth? If we go to the next page, there's a few different variables that we at Aurora Energy Research look at when we're thinking about forecasting load. We'll look at different scenarios. We've got a high scenario, an economic build or a central scenario, and then a low scenario, looking at possible different futures where, depending on the level of investment, economic growth, data center build out, industrial activity, general baseload growth, different possible scenarios for Nebraska. But the key here is that in all of these scenarios, we see load growing. So demand growth is something we expect to see even in the low scenario where there's kind of a subdued investment environment and demand. Even then, we expect to see some load growth. So, and then for the central or the high scenario, even more demand growth. Where's that coming from? A big part of the story is going to be industrial load. If you look at the graph on the right, it's just one data point from an OPPD study from a couple years ago, but I think it kind of helps tell the story of what's going on in the state. There's more electricity from industrial activity and economic development projects that help to drive that demand. And then finally, just to close out this section, a lot of the time we hear that, it's data centers that's driving this. It's just this high tech industry, and if we say no to that, then we're not going to have to worry about demand growth. But that's not necessarily true. It's all of the above that's driving the demand. So it's all kinds of economic activity help drive electricity growth. Yes, industrial activity and data centers, in urban areas are part of the story, but it's also your manufacturing plants. It's also your supply chain. It's also agricultural processing, the bioeconomy, irrigation. All of those things help drive electricity demand. And so all of those are going to contribute to higher demand for electricity and going to require more capacity to meet that demand, so that we can attract the kind of economic development that we want here in Nebraska. With that, I'll pass it on to Peyton to talk about the supply side of the equation.
Perfect. Thanks, Gaurav. So as Gaurav detailed, the expected demand growth, both US-wide and Nebraska. Next, we're going to focus on both the need for new power generation and how that new capacity may come onto the system, what it may look like. So to start, we're going to take a look at the existing capacity mix in Nebraska. So here we can see an evolution from 2014 to 2024 of the installed nameplate capacity and the annual electricity produced in Nebraska. So what we want to highlight here is that historically conventional baseload technologies such as nuclear, coal, and combined cycle gas have been a very important component of the electricity mix in Nebraska, and they remain so today. The largest change we've seen over the last 10 years has been a growth in wind capacity. So there's been an increase from around 1 gigawatt to approximately 4 gigawatts of installed wind capacity from 2014 to 2024, which is quite a large increase. We would highlight that the nameplate capacity numbers here represent a theoretical output of a power plant. It's kind of like thinking about the maximum you could get from a resource. As we'll see later on, there's differences in how this capacity counts towards reliability metrics, but it's a good overview of the amount that's installed of each technology. So key implications here, one is that continued capacity growth is expected to keep up pace with demand, and that the energy landscape is continually evolving. This is nothing new in each era of history. If we go back 500 years, 100 years ago, 10 years ago, the energy mix has always looked different. And that's just a continuation of that trend. Perfect. So now we're going to take a look at of the different technologies in the existing fleet, what the age of plants looks like. So here we've got the different technologies across the top and the total nameplate capacity installed in Nebraska, and we're evaluating below the average plant age of that technology in orange compared to the expected plant lifetime in yellow. So what stands out here is that some of the conventional baseload technologies are approaching an older age of average plant life. Why is that important? Partly just because you have a bit more age risk with plants as increased maintenance needs are required. But we would also highlight that refurbishments and upgrades can allow these generators to continue to operate. And additionally, it's a really important lever that can be used to meet expected load growth without bringing on new capacity because that has its own challenges. So again, it's a balance of utilizing the existing fleet to the best of its capabilities, while also looking to the future to see what new capacity will be needed to meet future demand. And so kind of
Peyton, one quick pause there. It sounds like some of the attendees are having some challenges seeing the shared material. I'm able to see it on my end. Kelly, is that something that can be addressed, or is it maybe that the attendees have to choose to focus on the content?
Let me work with Kelly to get that fixed for everyone. Just a moment. Why don't you guys go on ahead and
Okay,
I'll work on that.
sounds good.
perfect. So tying together that thought about meeting demand growth with new capacity, we're going to highlight some of the pressures and updated requirements that factor into this calculus. So as Gaurav mentioned, we have increasing peak demand that's expected to continue in the future in Nebraska. Additionally, there's an existing fleet that's been around for a long time. It's reliably served Nebraska, but the age of plants must be considered, both in their operation and bringing on future capacity. And on top of this, SPP, which is the Southwest Power Pool that oversees the wholesale electricity market and reliability requirements for a large area, now 17 states throughout the middle of the United States. They're the ones that regulate the PRM requirements. So that's planning reserve margin. It's essentially a metric that is used to ensure that the entities that are serving load are maintaining enough capacity in the system to meet future demand growth. So these requirements are being updated. They are increasing. They're additionally implementing a winter PRM in addition to just a summer PRM to improve reliability. And so what does this mean? Increasing demand, a need for new capacity, and changing requirements around reliability, that in the future, various supply will be needed to meet that expected demand. And so where would this supply come from? The traditional levers would be either from thermal baseload capacity, renewable capacity, or flexible capacity like batteries or gas peakers. And so taking a look at those different technologies, what we really want to highlight is that there's no silver bullet. It's a common theme that we hear in all of the above approach. This is really looking at, what are the advantages and drawbacks of different technologies. So when we think about traditional baseload technologies, gas combined cycle plants provide very, stable, dispatchable, around the clock output that can be located near urban centers. They have high efficiencies, which leads to lower emissions than other thermal plants, but there can be long lead times to procure important components of the supply chain. They're relying on natural gas pipelines, which could lead to supply interruptions in extreme events. Nuclear, very reliable, very low, zero emissions, low marginal cost of generation, but very high capital costs and long development timelines. When we think about renewable technologies, zero emissions, There is a very low marginal cost of electricity, just meaning that when they're generating, they're providing very cheap electricity to the system, but the output varies with weather. You can't dispatch wind and solar because that's based upon nature and how windy or sunny it is that day. For flexible technologies, the main ones we would consider would be peakers. So these are gas units that are meant to start up quickly, come online in more periods of system scarcity. They have a relatively low cost, but when they are running, it's a much higher operating cost and there's higher emissions. Batteries are very good at shifting energy from low demand to high demand hours. On average, can reduce wholesale electricity prices, and they're very fast starting assets, so they can come online in under seconds and meet flexibility needs for the grid. So, in summary, the overall message here is that there's no perfect technology. Each one has its own advantages, and really leaning on those advantages can help build a well-balanced and reliable portfolio. So when we think about what is being planned to come online from a capacity standpoint, we wanted to just take a look at the Nebraska Power Association Load and Capability Report. Again, this is an aggregation of the different Nebraska utilities plans for the future. And so what we can see here is three categories. So it's committed, planned, and studied capacity from Nebraska utilities. For each category, we've compared the accredited versus nameplate capacity, which again, nameplate is a maximum theoretical output, whereas accredited is what can count towards reliability requirements. Things to highlight here, the committed and planned resources, which are at a more advanced stage of planning. They're expected to come online more near term in the forecast, include a lot of traditional conventional capacity. So this is things such as gas plants. And these are a large part of the expected capacity build out in the short term. When we look at the studied category, which is used to plan for future needs for the utilities, we see a larger mix of renewables. And here it's important to note that when we compare the nameplate capacity to the accredited capacity, there's quite a large drop in how much of that renewable capacity can count towards reliability requirements.
Peyton, if I might quickly pause you there, we're getting a number of feedback from participants that they're unable to see the content. I know the chamber team is working to fix this, but there may be an interim solution for each of the participants on the call. In your Zoom banner at the very top, there's a thing next to where it says recording and sign in and the minimize, maximize, exit button. So kind of the top right of your screen. There should be a drop-down menu where you can choose the view that you're seeing. I think the default is standard view. And then there's also one where you can just do the content only or have the speaker and the content side by side. I think the content sharing has paused now, but you can choose the view so that you can see the content clearly.
I also just reshared, so please let us know if that looks better.
Okay, sounds like it's working now. Yeah, apologies all for the technical difficulties. It was tough to see from our standpoint because we weren't able to see it the way you were seeing it, but it sounds like it's working. All right, excellent.
Perfect. So stepping on, we're taking a look now at the Aurora forecast. Part of what we do is economic capacity expansion modeling. So it's just looking at what the economic decisions of plants would be in a modeled scenario. And here we see that around 4 gigawatts of additional capacity is needed by 2035 to meet forecasted demand. And so a mix of flexible and renewable technologies is largely what the outputs of our model see, but this is really just reiterating that over the next 10 years, there will be a need for new capacity, and this provides another view of how that may unfold. So when we think about where the new capacity is coming from, we like to highlight the interconnection queue. So the interconnection queue is a process in SPP that all new generation projects must pass through to come online and connect to the grid. So it's a pipeline of projects that are undergoing various studies and seeking that approval to begin generating electricity and contributing. So we can see the breakdown of projects on the right and the capacities. One thing to highlight is that there's a lot of different technologies represented. There's a mix of solar, wind, gas, batteries that all are looking to interconnect. In total, there's around 13 gigawatts of capacity. So one thing we would highlight is that most of these projects will not make it through the interconnection queue. And the main reason for that is that this is a nationwide phenomenon that we've been seeing. There's been a lot of interest in developing generation projects, and the size of queues has been rapidly increasing. So for scale, 13 gigawatts is about 30% more than the existing capacity in the state of Nebraska in 2025. So it's a very significant amount. But many of these projects, either due to changes in economics, they may have been speculative entries. The overall process takes 4 to 6 years, so a lot can change in that time frame. And ultimately, most of these projects will withdraw from the queue. When we take a bit more focused look at projects in the interconnection queue that have reached the stage of a fully signed interconnection agreement, this is a view of the projects that have made it kind of that final hurdle in the queue. So these would be most likely to be, ready to build and come online. It's not a guarantee that they have began construction, but it's a good indication of what is likely to try to interconnect in the future. And so what we can see is that, again, there's a large mix of technologies, wind, solar, gas peakers, batteries largely make up the majority of projects with a signed interconnection agreement. We would highlight that included in this is a mix of privately developed projects as well as utility projects. So, for example, OPPD is partnered with Google and Nextera to bring on a hybrid solar and battery project that includes around 420 megawatts of solar and 170 megawatts of battery capacity, which currently is the largest battery under physical construction in Nebraska. That would be included here. And more broadly, we would just show that not all projects included in this may come online and be counted towards reliability requirements. So that is to say that inclusion in this data does not guarantee that a project could come online and count towards those reliability requirements that load serving entities need to meet. Perfect. So now we're going to step on to think about transmission infrastructure, which is really what ties together generation and demand. Because when you generate electricity, you need to move it through transmission lines to serve those end-use customers. And so we're going to start by taking a look at the broader SPP transmission network. And so this is looking across 14 states where the transmission lines are. So the different colors represent different voltages. But the important thing to note here is that Nebraska is not an island. It's part of a broader system. There's a lot of interconnections to neighbors. Overall, electricity is the flows are determined by the laws of physics. And so being part of a large grid means that the overall system is one reliability picture rather than just state level entities. When we do look at the infrastructure for transmission in the state of Nebraska, we see a few things that stand out. One is that the majority of the transmission lines are focused in the eastern portion of the state. That's where the concentration is highest, and this is a reflection of where demand is located. So the Omaha and Lincoln areas have a lot of demand, and so a lot of the transmission infrastructure is helping to move generation throughout the state and to serve those demand areas. And so that's connecting generators both in the north and the west, particularly areas where there's important plants. such as large coal plants or heavy concentrations of wind generation. And so this is helping to connect those generators to demand. When we think about transmission infrastructure, one interesting result that happens in power markets is something called congestion. So for those that aren't familiar, this is not anything to be alarmed about. It is a very common byproduct of how electricity markets function. But in short, when you have congestion along a transmission line, meaning that the capacity has been reached for a certain line, then you can have an area where a more expensive generator is needed to serve demand because a less expensive generator that otherwise would have been able to serve demand is unable to because a line is constrained. And so really this is just showing through prices. The red prices represent higher prices, blue represents lower prices, where the congestion currently exists in Nebraska. And so broadly speaking, we see congestion between generation heavy areas in the west and the high demand areas in the east. And so this is an important component that goes into transmission planning when utilities and SPP as an organization is thinking about what upgrades are needed in the future to continue to serve demand reliably. And so when we look at plans for transmission upgrades in the future, one important data point is SPP's integrated transmission plan. So this is taking a look at the portfolio of projects that SPP is considering that will be needed in the future to alleviate congestion, ensure reliability, and make sure the system is resilient in various weather events. What's important here is that the size of the transmission planning budget has increased dramatically in recent years. So going back from 2023 and before, the largest ITP budget we had seen was about $1 billion in 2021. In 2024, the ITP portfolio was over $7 billion, which represented a 7x increase in what was previously the maximum budget. And in 2025, that increased to around $8.5 billion. So this is just showing that across SPP, there's a large awareness that future transmission upgrades are needed to serve demand growth and ensure a reliable system. Next, we're just going to briefly look at the 2024 and 2025 ITPs. We're really highlighting here that as part of those large budgets, there is multiple targeted upgrades in Nebraska that are aimed at ensuring reliability and meeting economic considerations. So that would be helping to relieve some of that congestion to ensure that generation is best placed to serve demand with the grid infrastructure. Great. So now I'll hand it back over to Gaurav to step through how the gas and electric systems are interconnected and some implications there.
Thanks, Ben. That's really helpful context, and just to emphasize that those investments have been a big part of keeping the grid up to par with the growth. But as growth continues, we'd expect to see more investment in the grid to help keep up with the demand growth that we're going to see down the line. If we look at the interconnection between the gas system and the electric system, that's a key part of supporting the grid. So just to set the stage a little bit, Nebraska is a key transit state for natural gas and a hub for regional deliveries. So you have a lot of natural gas flowing into the state from Colorado and Wyoming to the west, as well as from Kansas to the south. That gas that comes in goes towards Nebraska businesses, homes, electric plants, and industrial uses, with the remaining gas being shipped eastward toward Iowa. So, there's quite a bit of infrastructure in the state, and a lot of gas is passing through the state as well. Going to the next page, we can see that the natural gas pipeline infrastructure and the electrical transmission infrastructure are very much interlinked and interdependent, in particular when it comes to natural gas-fired power plants. So those natural gas-fired power plants need consistent fuel supply and pipeline deliverability to run when they're dispatched. Power plants are one of the main consumers of natural gas nationally, and electric reliability, uh, for those power plants depends on natural gas availability. So any kind of disruptions in either the pipeline delivery or the electrical transmission could potentially lead to, disruptions on the power side. And so when you're thinking about the interplay between the systems, they're really interlinked and they're part of the same story. Going to the next page, you can see that where new power plants are proposed to be built, they often follow the existing infrastructure on the natural gas and the electrical side. So in the map on the left, each of those bubbles represents a power plant in SPP's interconnection queue, with the darker bubbles being the more advanced power plants that have gone through that queue process. And the gas pipelines are in orange there. So you can see that these power plant proposals often follow where there's existing infrastructure and also where the demand is. So this is, of course, the eastern part of the state near the Omaha and Lincoln metro areas where there's a lot of demand for power. And so we see that's where these proposals typically follow. Quickly going to the next page, when we think about integrating the natural gas and electric system and better coordination between the two, um, that's an area where, on a national level, but also within Nebraska, better coordination could help drive both systems forward, in particular with better planning and alignment to support future growth. So the natural gas pipeline system and the electrical infrastructure are developed by different entities. They're, sometimes following different priorities for where they're going to build. And so better coordination alignment between the two systems could help. Same with, a stronger coordination framework, so more information sharing, more dialogue between the natural gas side of things and the public power side of things. And then finally, bringing gas suppliers into the conversation for economic development planning to make sure that when economic development projects are proposed for the state, all the relevant stakeholders are brought into the discussions, including on the natural gas side as well as the electric side. So all those things together, maybe some opportunities for better integration of the two systems to support economic development in Nebraska. Perfect. So if we go to the last section, we're going to discuss our public policy analysis for the state of Nebraska. Now, just to set a little bit of context and provide some background on what to expect in this section. So we've done a number of interviews with stakeholders across the energy infrastructure landscape, from the public power utilities to private developers, investors, industrial energy consumers, professional advisors. So kind of all across the landscape, and discuss, what are the kind of driving forces, challenges, opportunities, advantages, and how public policy can support energy infrastructure development and economic growth here in Nebraska. All of those interviews were on an anonymized basis so that folks could share freely and, provide all of their insights and analysis without fear of, attribution. And what we're going to showcase here are kind of the key takeaways, key insights that were distilled from all those conversations. So this is not necessarily, Aurora's company viewpoint. This is the consolidated insights from all of those discussions that we had throughout this process. So without further ado, there were kind of four key themes that came across throughout that process. First is that statewide leadership is absolutely essential to attract investment to the state and to facilitate economic development and energy project development. That kind of state level stewardship makes a big difference. Second, local permitting challenges, we heard across the board, are one of the biggest potential impediments to project development. It presents a lot of uncertainty as well as bottlenecks in development, and that uncertainty can hinder investment in the state. Third, Nebraska does have a number of advantages as an investment environment. So Nebraska does bring a lot to the table that gives it a leg up versus other states. And that's something we can discuss later. And then public power model advantages and opportunities. So, as we know, Nebraska is unique in having a public power system that presents a number of advantages to the state as well as some opportunities, and we can get into those as well. We did get a question online about examples of states that are at the cutting edge of policy. What can Nebraska learn from them? Are there, bills or specific policies that could help Nebraska? I think we can touch on some of those examples as we go through the next few slides. Those should come across. Perfect. So the first big theme that came across from all these conversations is that state level stewardship is essential to help attract investment. Um, the first important factor is that you need electricity to enable economic development. The state wants to develop economically, everyone wants economic growth, but it's important to make it clear to stakeholders that you need electricity to support that investment. So it used to be that a big economic development project could come to the state, say, great, we want to invest all these $1 million, we want to employ all these people, let's just plug into the grid. It's not that simple anymore. Electricity has to be part of the conversation from the beginning. Second, there's many states that are vying for a limited number of opportunities. So there's an quote unquote arms race going on between states. There's a number of different states that are trying to attract investment, position themselves to bring in investment into the state. We've heard from different stakeholders that there's some elements of Nebraska's tax framework that are competitive and some that were maybe historically competitive, but other states are offering more attractive tax advantages. And so it's not to say that Nebraska has to, offer the most advantages to attract investment because Nebraska has its own advantages outside of taxes, but really that a favorable and predictable tax and regulatory environment can help to make Nebraska competitive. And then thirdly, statewide leadership is essential to drive energy investment and economic growth. So stakeholders across the board expressed a desire for clear, well-defined objectives for energy project development coming from the highest levels of state leadership. And to the question from John earlier, there's some states where they set out very clearly, this is what we're looking for. If projects meet these metrics and meet these objectives, that's the kind of projects we want in the state. That's kind of the goal that we're aspiring towards. And so if you're an energy project developer or a public utility, you already know that those are the objectives you're aiming for. And that way, there's kind of a presumption that, okay, this project is something the state wants and it's going to get a green light because it's aligned with the statewide goals. Second, a statewide economic development playbook could help communicate the attractiveness of Nebraska to businesses and also provide some guardrails to ensure that the growth is organized, measured, and fits with the state's objectives. So again, really, a central strategy there. And then, this can really benefit the whole state. It's not just about driving growth to the urban areas where, there's already a lot of prosperity, but also throughout the rural areas where there's not always as much economic development investment. These power projects in particular can drive a lot of investment to those areas and help with tax revenue. So the takeaway there is that a consistent statewide strategy and policy framework with clearly defined objectives, guidelines, and buy-in from state level officials can help to facilitate energy investment and unleash economic growth. Going to the next page, a second part of that story is that local permitting is one of the biggest hurdles for projects that are entering the state of Nebraska. The first part of that picture is that municipal and county boards wield enormous power when it comes to permitting. They have the power to deny or indefinitely sit upon conditional use permits. There's no clear timeline, there's no clear playbook, there's no clear criteria that power project developers have to meet. And so there's a lot of uncertainty there. Often, one of the feedback we received is that often the default response from a county board is no. When they don't have the time or the resources to go through an an evaluated project, they'll just default to a no. And then a developer who's trying to build a project might not fight that ruling with litigation because that's costly, time consuming, and the outcome is indeterminable. So that unpredictability and that uncertainty with local permitting can deter project development. There's also 93 counties, and it's tough for developers to know which county to look at because there's different um, willingness to attract investment there. Another thing that we heard, about different states is that, in some states you can maybe go to the governor's office or legislature and ask someone to kind of use the bully pulpit or bring the hammer down on your local municipalities and kind of use the political influence. And that's an area that maybe there's still room for growth here in Nebraska. Second thing we heard is that county boards often don't have the time or the expertise to analyze these large project proposals. So these electricity projects are highly technical. They require a lot of expertise to review. And a lot of municipal and county boards, they're balancing a lot of different priorities, and they don't necessarily have the adequate time or the resources to evaluate utility scale power projects or transmission projects. And so without kind of clear guidelines, objectives, and timelines for county review, that uncertainty, again, can stifle these projects. One of the things we heard from investors in the state is, all I want is a number. Just tell me the number and I'll pay it. It's not the cost that kills these projects, it's the uncertainty that kills these projects. Because, I can't budget for more than twice the original planned timeline. And so if the county board doesn't have the time or the expertise to look at it, I can't manage that process. And so that's where, counties that don't have the time or expertise to analyze projects could benefit from state level support, state level resources to support project review and help address local concerns. And one thing I want to flag here to John's question about how it's approached in other states. So in some states, you can take Oregon as an example. The permitting, it's all done at the state level rather than at the county level for certain types of projects that meet certain requirements. So if you're investing in one of those states, if you meet the state level objectives, the project's going forward regardless of what the counties say. We heard from stakeholders that kind of state-only approach might not work for Nebraska because Nebraska really values local stakeholder input and local oversight at the county level. And so maybe for Nebraska, a approach that might work a little better within the context of Nebraska priorities is, helping support county stakeholders with state level resources rather than the state telling the county what to do. One final area to touch on here is that, there's a lot of regional differences in Nebraska. There's 93 counties, and there's a varying level of appetite for utility scale power projects across the state. One of the things we heard at the Go Big event a few weeks back is that there's just 5 counties that attract a majority of the nameplate capacity tax here in the state. And so for folks who are trying to build projects, they're often going to find those parts of the state that are more eager to attract the development because that helps keep those projects on time with the cost being more predictable. So one possible takeaway for Nebraska is that if there's voluntary programs where, some counties can maybe put their hand up and say, we want to attract this kind of development, and we're willing to adopt maybe more favorable zoning laws or more clear guidelines or standards, potentially even exchange for higher nameplate capacity taxes or state grants. That can help facilitate investment by driving development to where it's most wanted. Perfect. So, conscious of time, the next 2 takeaways I'll go through a little bit quicker. First, Nebraska has a number of competitive advantages that help drive development to the state. This will be no surprise to many of you on the call, but first, there's affordable, reliable energy. There's good land availability and land cost. There's strong workforce availability. So all of those things together help drive investment to the state and make Nebraska an appealing state to invest in. And in particular, I want to mention the utilities in Nebraska have helped support economic growth by helping to provide a lot of the affordable, reliable electricity that economic development projects are looking for. A second thing we heard is that the tax incentives in the state have been favorable. And in particular, the nameplate capacity tax, which is kind of a flat rate based on the size of the project, is something that we heard a lot of support for across the board. Even folks who are paying that tax really appreciate it because they know how predictable it is. It's based on the project size, it's simple, and it's easy to understand. And a developer can take that to a community and showcase the benefit of a project being built. That, if this project gets built at this size, this is exactly how many tax dollars will flow into the community, into the school system and the fire department, the libraries, and so on, and help alleviate the tax burden for the local community. And finally, being a part of SPP has been a boon for Nebraska. So SPP is the grid operator in which Nebraska sits. And that has driven a lot of innovative policies and innovative market reforms in recent years. And it's attractive for Nebraska to be part of that. And then the last slide for this section is that the public power model here in Nebraska presents a number of opportunities and advantages to the state. So the first thing is that Nebraska utilities are really supportive of economic growth and have maintained affordable, reliable power. And it's something we heard across the board. One of the utilities mentioned that we view economic development as part of our mission. And so there's really strong alignment between the goal of attracting economic growth and investment into Nebraska and the utilities being there to support it, and also to focus on affordable and reliable power for the ratepayers. We've also heard about a number of fruitful partnerships between public power utilities and private investors, whether that's big industrial projects, data centers and technology investment, power projects, in particular wind, and some batteries. So there's been a number of different positive partnerships between the public sector and the private sector. And that was also an area we heard some stakeholders express desire for more of. So there, in particular, some private power developers expressed that they would want to take on some more risk, maybe in areas where the public power utilities wouldn't necessarily want to venture their own capital. And so there were some private investors who expressed desire for more public-private partnerships where Nebraska could benefit from more innovative technologies or maybe not yet proven technologies with private capital taking on more of the risk and then partnering with public power once the technology is proven. So that sums up the policy takeaways from this report. We have a few minutes left for Q&A and would like to open it up. Please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A function of the chat.
All right, any last call for questions? Okay, well, thank you again for putting up with our technical difficulties here at the chamber. And we will be posting the slide deck and the recording next week. And we will also have the published study on our website as well. And that can be found at anychamber.com/foundation. And you'll be able to see all of our foundation investors and all of our published studies that will include this next week, again, with that slide deck and the recording as well published. So a big thank you to Aurora Energy Research, Gaurav and Payton. You guys have been wonderful to work with. And a big thank you to our foundation investors again, who make all of these studies possible. They invest in the studies and also give great input as we go through the research phase. So thank you again to everyone for your time. Please reach out to me, Tara Norris, tnorris@anychamber.com if you have any questions. And we look forward to updating you on the rest of the study in the coming months. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.